Can you imagine Mars, the red planet, with a giant waterfall? It seems impossible, right? After all, Mars is now a dry, desert-like place, without a drop of water to tell a story. But what if I told you that, way back in the past, Mars had huge rivers and, believe it or not, even enormous waterfalls? That's right. Scientists have discovered that, billions of years ago, Mars might have had landscapes so spectacular that they would make Niagara Falls look small. Come along, because you're about to discover a story of water, rocks, and gigantic waterfalls on a planet where, not too long ago, we thought there was nothing but dust. But before we start, I ask you to leave your like and subscribe to the channel, as there's a new video every day. Just imagine, Mars is a planet that, in some ways, is similar to ours. It's made of rock, just like Earth, and has many interesting and mysterious formations. But do you know what makes Mars so different from our planet? Its surface is quite clear in the sense that there isn't much that blocks our view. We can see everything very clearly, which helps us understand how Mars is such a unique place with a story very different from ours. Now, if you're wondering, does Mars have waterfalls like Earth? Well, NASA has captured some interesting formations there that look like waterfalls. But there's an important difference: Mars is a dry planet. There isn't enough water there, neither in the ground nor in the air, to create a real waterfall, one that flows endlessly. These waterfalls we see in the images are actually a kind of record of what Mars was like a very, very long time ago. It's funny to think that a place that is now cold, dusty, and without water was once very different in the past. These formations that look like waterfalls show that Mars once had water flowing on its surface, just like we do on Earth. And this is amazing because it indicates that Mars holds secrets about a completely different past. So, how do we have waterfalls here on Earth? Well, you've probably heard of the Iguazu Falls or Niagara Falls, two of the largest waterfalls in the world. These formations only exist because Earth has plenty of water. Nearly 3/4 of our planet is covered with water, including oceans, rivers, lakes, and even ice. And with the help of the water cycle, where water evaporates, forms clouds, and falls as rain again, we end up creating a constant movement that allows waterfalls and other formations to appear. Now, look at Mars again. It seems so dry and deserted that you might wonder if there was ever water there, right? Well, scientists have discovered that, in a very, very distant past, Mars was once quite different. It had rivers, lakes, and maybe even oceans. That's because probes and rovers exploring the red planet found marks on the ground that look like ancient riverbanks and even dry lake beds. They also found rocks that could only have formed if water had once flowed over them. It's as if Mars is a giant book telling the story of a time when it was wetter and warmer, a place much more like Earth than it is today. This helps us understand that Mars still has many hidden mysteries, and who knows, maybe in the future, we'll uncover even more secrets about this amazing planet. Let's think together. A waterfall is a stream of water that falls from a height, right? For it to exist, there needs to be a lot of water flowing. The waterfalls we know here on Earth are amazing because of the sheer amount of water that passes through them, and the size of these falls depends on how much water is available to fall. So, the amount of water flowing makes all the difference in the size and strength of the waterfalls. Now, think about Mars, this distant, dry, cold, and dusty planet. Can you imagine that a place like that once had enough water to create waterfalls? It seems strange, doesn't it? But the truth is that Mars wasn't always so dry and desert-like. In a distant past, it was quite different from what we see today. If you've heard about Mars before, you might know that scientists have found several pieces of evidence that show this planet was once wet. Probes and robots exploring Mars found signs that look like ancient riverbanks and even markings on the ground that resemble dried lake beds. Some rovers, those robots that travel across the Martian surface, have even found rocks that seem to have been shaped by water over time. This means that, long ago, Mars had rivers and maybe even large waterfalls. But how would a waterfall be possible on Mars? For a waterfall to happen, you don't just need water, you also need an elevated area for the water to fall from. And Mars has many valleys, canyons, and even mountains, formed by ancient volcanoes. These formations create the perfect steps for a waterfall. So, if you had water flowing and falling from a considerable height, voila, you'd have a waterfall on Mars. Images taken by satellites orbiting Mars show places that look like dry waterfalls, as if the planet had a scar from where the water once flowed. In Cassie Valley, for example, a vast valley that stretches over 2,400 kilometers, scientists observed that water must have carved these landscapes a long time ago. They found places where the terrain drops up to 500 meters, a staggering height. The edge of these dry waterfalls stretches for many kilometers, showing just how far the water once reached. Just imagine, here on Earth, we have Niagara Falls, one of the most famous waterfalls in the world. It's about 50 meters tall and stretches approximately 1 kilometer, counting both the US and Canadian sides. It's an incredible sight, with millions of liters of water falling and creating an impressive view. Now, try to imagine something even bigger and more spectacular, on Mars. On Mars, in Cassie Valley, there are signs that, billions of years ago, enormous waterfalls existed, much larger than Niagara Falls. These Martian waterfalls would have dropped from gigantic heights, forming a landscape so incredible that it would surpass anything we have here on Earth. Today, Mars is completely dry and covered in dust, but the marks of those waterfalls are still there, telling the story of a very different time. Scientists also found a second dry waterfall on Mars, just as impressive as the first. Both were carved by the power of water, which, over billions of years, eroded the ground, forming deep channels and valleys. These waterfalls moved quite a distance from their original points, pushed by the force of water that flowed intensely, especially in narrower areas of the valley, where the channel narrowed and the flow became faster and stronger. The water on Mars was so powerful that it broke off pieces of rock, widening the valley and creating these large waterfalls. The rock in Cassie Valley was made of basalt, a type of hardened lava that, as it cools, forms natural cracks. During the floods, the water's strength opened these cracks even more, tearing off blocks of rock and widening the channel. Each time the water fell, it widened these cracks, leaving the terrain even more carved and impressive. Along the path of the waters, Mars also displayed incredible landscapes. In one crater, for example, something interesting happened. The raised edge of the crater acted as a natural barrier, protecting part of the soil behind it from the force of the water. This created a protected erosion area where the water had less impact. Over time, the water flow carried debris that eventually accumulated behind the crater, forming a large layer of sand. If you think that's amazing, imagine, Mars not only has the tallest mountain in the solar system, but it also seems to have the largest traces of waterfalls. These discoveries show that, even without water now, Mars holds incredible stories of a grand and vibrant past.